Suqian married Liu Shijun, a childhood sweetheart who had been friendly with the Su family for generations. She thought she had grabbed the life.Saving grass, but what she didn't expect was a deadly knife. On the night of his wedding, Liu Shijun left her, claiming to have earned her a fortune. He held on to the belief that the two of them would eventually work hand in hand with their white heads and persevered in the mansion. 5 years later, Liu Shijun returned with a mother and son. The two of them had strange conversations and behavior, and they avoided her. Liu Shijun held his lover and stood in front of Su Gui, saying, "I have given you 5 years of noble motherhood. It's time to give your child back to his mother." The aristocratic family was not divorced, let alone divorced, and Su Xuan decided not to be manipulated by anyone again. Liu Shijun wants to unite with the enemy country and rise up straight. She insisted on demolishing his ladder to climb the sky and turning him into ashes to avenge her country and herself. Someone wants the lives of her uncle and brother. Suqian led the people to kill him without leaving a trace. It is rumored that sticking a jade pendant on the door can ensure the safety of the people at night. Xiao Li held her lost jade pendant and rubbed it in her ears and temples, saying, "I am good at killing people. Don't dirty your hands." At night, Xiao Li knelt at Su Ting's feet, gentle as water. "Here are the mountains and rivers for you. As a hired servant, please take a look at me." Chapter 1. Amitabha Buddha. You are listening at novelfull.audio. It's night, everything is quiet. In a guest hall located on the right side of Ningguo Temple, there is a woman lying in her clothes. "Help! Help me!" Su Ting sat up straight and looked around in confusion, his gaze fixed on the window. Who is there?" "There are black shadows sliding off the window." Suqian suddenly woke up and saw that the bed next to her was empty. Without time to think about anything else, she quickly got up and walked over to open the window latch. The cool breeze hit her face, and a tall figure leaped in, embracing her in her arms. Male. Kai Wei. Kai. Suqian's lips felt a burning sensation. A man is like a hungry wolf, eager, rough, and enthusiastic. She, who has not rested well, has no strength to resist. I don't know how long it took, but the man got off her. Suqian lay in bed with wide eyes open, unable to move. She was a married woman who was practicing Buddhism in the Qing dynasty, but was unexpectedly she's going to kill him. "Miss, you." The man suddenly leaned over, spoke, reached out, and was so scared that Su Gui rolled and fell to the ground. The pain made her grit her teeth and she grabbed the object nearby before smashing it. The man didn't dodge and calmly picked up his clothes. "We will meet later." Su Yan watched helplessly as Deng Tuzi fled from before him, leaping through the window and disappearing into the night in the blink of an eye. Only then did he take off his guard, his whole body softened, and he almost collapsed to the ground. "My husband Lu Lang has been away from home for 5 years, and finally he sent her a letter from home, which arrived soon. Calculating the journey, it's been these 2 days. My grandmother knew that she was very mindful of her husband and regularly came to the temple to pray and offer incense, so she came to fulfill her wishes. But she, what face do you have? Goodbye, husband." Looking at the silver sadness seeping through the window, Su Yan's tears silently flowed down her face as she put on her clothes, afraid to make any sound. Outside the door came the frightened cries of Xiangjin. "Kai Wei." Suqian's body froze and she quickly wiped away her tears. Before she could figure out what to do, she couldn't let anyone see the clues. Kai Wei was supposed to sleep on that empty couch, but she had no idea when she left. The door was open from outside at this moment. "Young lady. I have lost my composure and woke you up." The room was dim, and Xiangjin did not notice any unnatural expression on her face. "Put her on the couch first." Suqian suppressed the huge waves in his heart and gave a deep command, then grabbed the person inside and turned to close the door. "Young lady, I'm here. You've been too tired to pray for me these past few days, and your voice has become hoarse. Xiangjin covered Kai Wei with bedding and poured a glass of water. A sentence made Su Ting's heart tremble. He slowly took the cup, drank it expressionlessly, and gave a command. Take a look at Kai Wei. She has always been healthy, how could she faint under the eaves? Xiangjin opened the bedding and checked it. Lu Lang soon returned home, and his grandmother asked the powerful guardian to stay in the mansion for renovation and repair. This time when he came to Ningguo Temple, Su Yan brought 2 close maidservants. Yesterday, it rained heavily before dark. After having a fast meal, Xiangjin went to inform the driver to pick up his wife at the entrance of the temple, but did not wait by his side. Open the door. Suqian had something on his mind, and he didn't notice when someone came outside. When he realized it, his voice had already reached the door. As the words fell, a bright light rushed in with the scattered dust. Xiangjin hurriedly pulled over the bedding and covered the person. Grandmother. Madam, Xiangjin followed the master's footsteps in the ceremony. Suqian stood up and bowed respectfully, wondering why the old man was here at this time. If you arrive a little early, you may encounter, I know you haven't brought a guard with you, and it's raining again. It's inconvenient for a single woman to be outside. My old age set out to pick you up at dawn and take you back to the mansion. I never expected to hear about something happening in the upper guest house where you were resting. The old lady, supported by a maid, walked past her with a stern face and stood by the window. You, go through the matter carefully. The old lady raised her hand sharply and pointed towards the door. Seeing that there were many people standing outside, Su Yan couldn't help but clench her handkerchief and hold on to her mind. Are you being a little monk arrived at the door, expressionless with his hands clasped together and slightly bent over. The little monk woke up in a hurry at night. When he heard a sound, he thought there was a thief. He never expected to see him enter the door of the female benefactor and close it. Then he heard the woman's ambiguous voice. The little monk finished speaking slowly and pointed to the man who was bound. Amitabha Buddha. After the little monk finished speaking, he retreated to the side. In the middle of the night, a lonely man and a widowed daughter, this meaning is all too clear. Suqian looked silently at the man kneeling on the ground, her tightly clenched handkerchief loosened, and only then did she realize that her inner clothes were thin and sweaty. It's better not to be that person. Stinky monk spits blood out of his mouth. There lives a young lady in this guest hall. You're saying this to ruin the young lady. Xiangjin was so angry that she opened her mouth and cursed, completely forgetting that there were 2 people in the room at that time. Shut up. The old lady scolded in a low voice, and Xiangjin opened her mouth. She looked at the calm-looking master and lowered her head in anger. Is that so? Suqian thought his grandmother was asking him, looked up, but found that the old lady's bright and lively gaze was straight at the man kneeling outside the door. The man was disheveled, his face turned red, and his eyes flickered. In the darkness, it was impossible to see his face clearly. All I knew was that the man was tall and powerful. In a moment of desperation, I came across his clothes that had a delicate touch and were not made of ordinary fabrics, while the man in front of me was not dressed in luxurious attire. Yes, it's like this. The man who was tied up turned pale and red for a while. He glanced at Su Yan and couldn't straighten his tongue, saying, I just drank too much alcohol and was confused for a moment. I didn't know it was the young lady inside. Upon hearing the man's voice, Su Ting remained silent and asked coldly, his voice neither high nor low, with a hint of intimidation that was enough to make everyone hear. Is that right? The man was taken aback and looked in a certain direction in the room, confidently answering without admitting his mistake. Young lady, I'm damn it. No matter what the Liu mansion does, I am willing to accept you. The man said, fan your face. Suqian. The old lady called her by her first name. Suqian looked at the scene in front of him, clenched his fists in his sleeves, and remained calm as he looked at the familiar old man standing in the dark. Sun's wife is here. Is what he said true? The old lady asked solemnly. The man personally admitted that adding a young monk as a witness, whether it is true or not is no longer important. Grandmother, can granddaughter ask another question? Seeing that the old lady remained silent, Su Yan looked at the young monk and said, Little master, monks do not lie. The little monk nodded and clasped his hands in 11 salutes. How long did you watch from the sidelines? At that time, the poor monk was anxious and didn't listen carefully. He wanted to come back and advise the Buddhist sect not to engage in such filth, but he encountered the abbot. The little monk answered calmly. Suqian remained expressionless and looked at the man kneeling on the ground, speculating that Siwei's fainting was closely related to this person. Currently, Siwei's situation was unclear, and he openly framed her. You said you succeeded, could you please let me know which bed in the room you were on? The man confidently pointed to a place. Upon seeing this, Su Jian signaled to Xiangjin to move away. After seeing the lying figure, the man was surprised and quickly moved his fingertips to point to another place. Chapter 2. Yi returns. You are listening at Novel Full.Audio. Sun's daughter.In.Law was tired of copying Buddhist scriptures, so Kai Wei stayed in the room to take care of me. This person saw that slandering Sun's daughter.In.Law was not successful and then bit Kai Wei, clearly lying. Xiangji nodded fiercely beside her and said, Deng Tuzi, you don't know, there are 2 people in the room. The man looked at the old lady in fear and panic, then at Su Yan, unable to say anything. The old lady beside her met Su Yan's gaze and immediately replied, It's okay if it's none of your business. Her voice sounded much more relaxed than before. Grandmother, it seems that there are still doubts about the incident. It concerns the lives of Sun daughter.In.Law Qingyu and Kai Wei, and it is inconvenient to handle the dirty matter at Ningguo Temple. Sending this person to the government would damage the dignity of the mansion, so it would be better to leave it to Sun daughter.In.Law to handle. The old lady replied without hesitation, My son has always been calm in his affairs, and I can trust him. Su Ling ordered the guardian to imprison the man, reminding everyone not to reveal any information about the incident. He also asked someone to invite a doctor to see Kai Wei before she left the temple. The old lady's carriage led the way, closed the door and pondered, and no one knew what she was thinking. After the rain, the air in the mountains is fragrant, making it particularly difficult to walk on dirt roads. Suqian stayed up all night, suffering from a discomfort like being run over by a wheel. He was restless and didn't notice anything unusual. Young lady, Xiangjin mustered up her courage. The servant tidied up and found something missing. There were many people just now, and I didn't dare to speak up. Suqian touched her chest, something fell off. It was originally worn with me, but I took it off as a sign of respect during the Buddha worship. I hate myself for being so careless and losing such valuable things. If someone comes knocking on me, the consequences will be unimaginable. I have carefully searched for it, but there is no one in the upper hall. It shouldn't be that person. Young lady, what should we do now? Since childhood, Xiang Jin has been accompanying Su Zhen as she grew up. She knows the importance of things and sees that something is wrong with her master. She assumes it's all because she lost something and has encountered a disciple who is climbing and biting recklessly. She comforts her by saying, I have already gotten to know an abbot in the temple. After seeing my grandmother back, I will come back to look for her. Suqian couldn't help but think of the person's movements when rolling clothes. Xiangjin. Suqian put down the car curtain, gave a few instructions, and then closed his eyes. Last night, she was heavily disturbed. Just now, she struggled and the bumpy road made her whole body uncomfortable. She frowned and fell asleep. I arrived at the mansion after noon. The old lady didn't wait for Su Ting to get off the car, so she walked in first and left her maid to pass the message. Love is deep, responsibility is severe, it's her thoughtlessness. Looking at the gorgeous dark patterned figure, Su Xuan sensed an indescribable difference. She owed the Liu mansion. Su Xuan lowered his head and frowned silently. Tang Di and Chang Pu, who were left behind to purchase items in the mansion, waited on the side and followed Su Yan back to Linglong Garden. Before returning to Linglong Garden, the old lady from Kingswewan chased after her and said that Mrs. Liu had given her a package of things. The old lady said that you have been working hard for the past 2 days and have become quite haggard. Your voice has also become hoarse. This order will be served to you by the servant, and it will take effect for 2 days. Suqian smiled and nodded, pondering in her heart whether her grandmother had noticed something in the bathing pavilion. Su Yan had others guard the door, soaking in a hot water bucket and rubbing vigorously, turning red and breaking her skin. She wished she could change her skin bag, and the real pain forced her to face the fact. She and her husband were childhood sweethearts, but even after the downfall of the Su family, her husband insisted on marrying her. Their marriage was a beautiful story in Yongqing back then, but as soon as they got married, Liu Shijun left Yongqing. Before leaving, he boasted that he would earn a reputation and come back to ask for an imperial decree for Su Shi. Now, he returned triumphantly as promised, while my younger brother Su Chini will only be crowned next year, and the entire mansion depends on him. The Su family's century-long reputation cannot be destroyed in her hands. Tears mixed with hot water, making Su Yan cry silently, her body trembling uncontrollably in the water. What should she do? If you tell the truth. No. 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 There must be another way. Yes, there must be another way. Don't mess around on your own. After washing for an extra long time, Xiangjin couldn't help but excitedly say, "Young lady, the servant has come to report my arrival." Su Yan suddenly opened his eyes and instantly withdrew his sadness. So fast. Young lady. Xiangjin looked at Su Yan's pale face and unusually red eyes, and couldn't help but ask, "Young lady, are you feeling unwell?" "Change clothes," Su Ting replied calmly. Although Xiangjin had doubts, she didn't say anything in the end. Who can still smile when encountering such a thing in the temple? If someone had cried, made a fuss, and hung themselves earlier. The master and servant did not leave until Su Jifu looked no different from usual. On the way, Xiangjin reported the situation one by one. Kai Wei was knocked unconscious by a blunt object on the back of her head and had already woken up. She could rest for a while. That man is kept under strict supervision outside, and as soon as there is a result, someone will come to deliver the letter. In addition, the young master asked the servant to say, "Remember to protect yourself in everything." Upon hearing this sentence, Su Ting's body paused and said, "Uncle won't help." Suqian has never had any blood on her hands, and she feels that if a man dares to act like this, he must not have taken her seriously. Her methods may not be able to answer any questions. "Young lady, I went to the military camp to find someone and ran into the young master. When I saw the young master, I guessed it was you who had something to do." "No, I couldn't hide it from the young master." As they spoke, when the master and servant arrived at the door, a group of people and horses gathered around it, creating a lively atmosphere. The old lady who had not slept long also arrived, accompanied by her mother.In.Law and father.In.Law Liu Yong. "Junior." Mrs. Liu exclaimed excitedly. The man on horseback grabbed the reins and jumped down, holding the old lady in his arms. "Grandmother. My grandson misses you," he said. The mother.In.Law standing on the side was also embraced by Liu Shijun. "Father." Liu Shijun clenched his fists and compiled a gift. "Okay. Just come back neat and tidy. Order it. Liu Mansion will hold a 3-day banquet. Banquet-friendly colleagues of the clan." Suqian stood 2 meters away, looking at their joyful faces, with a slightly raised corner of his mouth. He had a graceful expression, black and sturdy, which was very different from before. Feeling Su Yan's gaze, Liu Shijun finally looked over and smiled at her slightly. With just one glance, he turned his head and waved to the carriage. Suqian only then saw a carriage following in the queue, and the attendant carried a boy in splendid attire down from it. Dad! The corner of Su Yi's mouth that had just been curved slowly faded away, as she watched Liu Shijun with a pampered expression, leading the child to her. Her body was weak and about to collapse, but fortunately, Xiang Jin quickly helped her and barely stood up straight. Come and visit your mother. The little boy tightly held Liu Shijun's hand, his clear eyes fixed on Su Jian, and he remained silent for a while, reserved and distant. Mother. Su Yan repeated in confusion. She was his wife who had entered the family tree, and he also knew that he had never had an affair with other women. Where did he get his child? This. What a lovely little person, Juner, whose child is he from? Mother-in-law Jiang couldn't help but laugh and reached out to touch her little face. Liu Shijun ranked second and was the only male servant in the mansion. Therefore, Mrs. Liu and her mother-in-law Jiang made great efforts to help Liu Yong collect his aunt, but her father refused to accept it. They were married for 5 years, and on the second day of their wedding, Liu Shijun left home. After all these years, there were no new residents added to the mansion. Now, as a child stands in front of everyone, he sees how much Liu Shijun values him and loves his family. Juner, what's going on? Liu Yong asked beside him. Upon hearing his father-in-law ask what he was thinking, Sui couldn't help but look at the spirited Liu Shijun. Alright, Juner is tired. Let's change into clothes and take a shower first. Everyone has returned. When can we ask questions? The old lady spoke, but Liu Yong had nothing to say. Liu Shijun paused and said, my son has been running around all the way. I will report back to my father and mother later. No one noticed that the handkerchief that Su Yan was holding was almost twisted into a rope. She stood on the side, watching Liu Shijun lead the child past her. The elders walked ahead and each returned to the courtyard, while she returned to Linglong Garden. Not long after, Liu Shijun sent his attendants back to tell Su Jian that hot water should be sent to the study, and then the child should be prepared to change clothes. Is that all? Su Yan couldn't help but ask the person. The person who asked was taken aback and answered seriously, that's all. Shouldn't he say something? Have you never thought of her after being away from home for so long? And the child of unknown origin Suqian sat in a familiar position, feeling that everything had changed again, even though nothing had changed. It wasn't until dinner when everyone was dining together that Su Jian saw Liu Shijun again. The boy seemed to be very afraid of strangers, constantly relying on him. During meals, the boy naturally sat between them. On the table, Su Yan saw Liu Shijun picking a fish for the little boy, and she sat beside him like a needle felt. You eat too. Liu Shijun sandwiched a piece of fish-like meat and placed it in Su Ting's bowl. His actions caught the attention of a table full of people. Suqian slightly curved the corner of her mouth and served him soup. Dad doesn't like pearl soup. When the childish voice sounded, everyone agreed without speaking and looked at each other with different expressions. Chapter 3. Double Happiness on the Door. You are listening at novelfull.audio. He has loved drinking since he was young. Su Yan laughed at how he could be serious with a child, and his face blushed as he spoke. He used to love drinking the pearl soup she made himself, and before he even got married, he would always try his best to get a bowl of soup from her. Starting from knowing that he was coming back, he needed to take care of everything inside and outside, and was so busy that he didn't touch the ground. He still made time to make soup himself. Well, it's not as delicious as before. Liu Shijun took a sip and put it down, while Su Gui replied awkwardly, maybe it's been a long time since I did it, and I've had a new hand. Perhaps time flies, pushing everyone forward, no longer in the past, and appetite remains the same. The delicious food in front of them lost its color, and there was an invisible pressure between the two, which made Su Yi's chest a bit congested. Sensing her change, Liu Shijun wanted to speak up and break through their barrier. The boy grabbed his sleeve and whispered to him in whispers. I saw the little boy leave his seat with Liu Shijun's permission. Grandmother, show filial piety to you. The boy took out a small toy from his sleeve, took Mrs. Liu's hand, and placed it in his palm. Mrs. Liu immediately smiled and smiled. Okay. Good child. The mansion hasn't been so lively for a long time. Why don't we keep you by my side, okay? Suqian was about to refute when he felt the hem of his skirt being touched. He lowered his head and saw that Liu Shijun's feet were moving. Looking at him again, he drank the wine without knowing why. Perhaps it was an unintentional move by him. Suqian sat up straight as if he hadn't noticed anything. Mother, the matter of the legitimate son is of great importance, Liu Yong frowned, expressing confusion. Liu Shijun is about to enter the government, but he is also cautious amidst the glory of his family, fearing to ruin the honor he has finally obtained. I have already asked for you, Mrs. Liu's voice sank. A child who lost both parents during the war, Junior, is kind-hearted and has brought him back. It turned out to be an orphan, and the huge stone weighing down on Su Yi's heart relaxed a bit. As long as it wasn't for him or others, she could accept it. Furthermore, can Liu Mansion still short the child's appetite? If this child adds a touch of color to the young couple, wouldn't it be even better? Mrs. Liu is usually very kind as a son, but now as a child without blood ties, she has a lot of words towards Liu Yong. Suqian and Liu Shijun have been married for 5 years. When they first got married, Liu Shijun moved out of Yongcheng on the grounds of obtaining official positions and did not let Suqian follow, otherwise he would be distracted. 6 months later, a family letter arrived in Suqian's hands, and he abandoned his studies and went to the border. Since then, there have been occasional letters from families mentioning only a few words and phrases about Su Yi. Fearing that it would affect his future, Su Yan silently shouldered all the difficulties that the Liu mansion had experienced in the past 5 years. Are you unwilling? Mrs. Liu cast a sharp gaze. My husband and grandmother agreed to this matter, and my father.In.Law had nothing to say. My mother.In.Law couldn't count on it, and Su Yan's hand unconsciously exerted more force. A voice in her mind told her that she had agreed, maybe it wouldn't hurt. You have accepted him now, which is equivalent to giving him a way of life and nurturing. He will never forget it. What's wrong with that? Liu Shijun suddenly turned his head and looked at her seriously with a drunken expression. Unexpectedly, the longest sentence he said to her after returning home was for a child. If he likes children, she can have them on her own. Unfortunately, something like that happened as Su Yi hesitated. Madame Liu picked up a glass of wine from the table and brushed past her, smiling and wishing the others well. In our mansion, today is a day of double happiness, congratulations. Congratulations. The sound of toasts and joyful words in the room was overwhelming. Seeing Kai Wei approaching, Su Xian found an excuse to leave the dining table. Why did you come instead of instructing you to rest for 2 days? Suqian takes a light responsibility. The moon was dark and the wind was high outside, feeling a bit lonely, but I felt my breathing was smooth. The maids are all well rested. Kai Wei looked at Su Gui's expression and cautiously said, Young lady, how can I claim a child whose origin is unknown? She didn't have the heart to rest and quickly came to the master's side. Perhaps he is really lonely outside. Having a child can relieve the stress, Su Yan said lightly. But you have been struggling in the mansion, isn't it better? I have my own opinion on this matter, but it's you. What happened last night? Why did I sleep so soundly? Xiangjin also looked curiously at Kai Wei with Su Yan. Fortunately, Su Yan remained calm and composed when facing difficulties, otherwise the sewage would have spilled on him earlier, and the scene before him would have been completely different. On that day, only Su Yan and Kai Wei were left in Ningguo Temple. Before resting, She drank the vegetarian soup brought by Kai Wei to warm her body, and then went to sleep. Kai Wei saw her master fall asleep and sat beside her dozing off. She heard a commotion outside and opened the door to inquire about the situation. However, when she saw a man, she tried to stop him, causing a physical conflict, and then she knew nothing. So that person should have aimed at them in advance and waited for the opportunity to take action, but was caught by the little monk and caught. No one knew, but she escaped from the tiger's mouth and fell into the wolf's belly. Listening to the laughter and joy in the room and thinking of what had happened at Ningguo Temple, Su Ting felt a bit uneasy. Kai Wei thought of something again and added a sentence. "Master, if you want to talk about the difference, the soup you drank was sent by the monk to the servant." "Little monk, how about sending?" Upon hearing the words, Su Ting came to her senses. She had to find a way to quickly know what had happened at Ningguo Temple that day. Realizing this, Su Ting thought while returning to Linglong Garden. The hour of high has passed, and Xiangjin came in with a curtain to tell Su Jian that Liu Shijun had drunk too much. After chatting with Liu Yong in calligraphy, they rested directly in the study and came back tomorrow. Upon hearing this, Su Yan closed her eyes. She was afraid that he might come and didn't know how to face it, but when she heard that he wasn't coming, she felt a little disappointed for some reason. That night, Su Yan slept extremely restlessly. In the swamp, Su Yi sank deeper and deeper. Liu Shijun squatted beside him, holding grass in his mouth, leisurely watching her until she could see nothing. The suffocation startled Su Jian out of her sleep. When preparing breakfast, Liu Shijun arrived, walked through the courtyard, and sat gracefully beside Su Gui. Xiangjin served him congee. Knowing that the couple had not seen each other for many years and had many things to say, everyone retreated outside. Su Yingying pinched the jade spoon with her white fingers and ate slowly. After so many years, she is still as beautiful as when she was waiting for words, no, more serene, dignified, and mother.in.law-like. Liu Shijun reached out his hand to Su Shi and was about to touch her wrist when his hand suddenly stopped and slowly withdrew. Every move was seen by Su Xian. She pretended not to find it and drank congee slowly, waiting for him to speak. Feeling that Liu Shijun wanted to say something several times, but in the end, he held back. "Father said that as long as you agree, you can choose an auspicious day to open the ancestral temple. My grandmother has already let go, but if I don't agree, it seems that I am unreasonable. You don't have to worry, just go ahead and do your own thing. I'll be the one behind it," Su Yan whispered softly, as she just saw the lingering love in his gaze at the boy. She is no longer complete, so it's better to do something for him. Perhaps this can resolve her guilt towards him. That's great. Liu Shijun clearly had a better appetite, a smile hanging on his face, and he picked up his bowl to take a big sip. Upon hearing this, Su Yan slowly lowered her eyes, concealing the rising emotions. That boy has an extraordinary weight in his husband's heart. Liu Shijun specifically instructed Su Yan to prepare more sets of clothes for the child. If there were not enough servants in the mansion, Ren Yazi would bring someone over to let her choose. "I've been a bit busy in the past few days. I'll come find you when I'm done." Suqian nodded and watched as Liu Shijun walked to the door, only to see him suddenly stop. Chapter 4. Beating to death with random sticks. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Thank you. Looking at the man's back, Su Yan only felt his gratitude and happiness, making people feel dazed. Kingsui Wan, the old lady is in a good mood. After Su Yan paid her respects as usual, she was left behind. Mrs. Liu looked at her with a thoughtful gaze, then put down her teacup and said in a slightly heavy voice, "The people coming and going in Ningguo Temple are like eating a bear's heart and leopard's gall. I heard you found a place to detain him, but what can you find out?" Mrs. Liu held a teacup and pushed the tea leaves with a lid. She took a sip and her eyes fell on Su Yan's face. "Returning to my grandmother, no. Since that's the case, let him suffer a bit and let it go. No way, Su Yan replied without even thinking. Although it was not successful, it almost ruined the reputation of his granddaughter-in-law. What will be the face of the Liu mansion then? Suqian, who has always been obedient, refused her. Mrs. Liu's pupils were slightly open, her movements were small and fast, so fast that no one noticed. Junior has returned, and there will be more affairs and social engagements both inside and outside this mansion. The people around the mistress should not have any blemishes. Madame Liu hinted that the person who was trampled on was Kai Wei. Kai Wei has not been violated. Su Yan appeared unusually calm. Grandmother, if the master cannot protect his servants, I'm afraid no one will be willing to follow his granddaughter in the future. After being refuted one after another, Mrs. Liu's face turned slightly cold and she said calmly, "You are a person with a sense of propriety. Let's see what you do." After speaking, she thought of something and reminded, "We will arrange a 3-day banquet. If necessary, please don't hesitate to send someone over. The Liu mansion has been clean for generations, and Liu Yong is just an idle worker in the Hanlin Academy. His salary will be good for a year without being poured in. His mother.In.Law Jiang, who gave birth to a young daughter, suffered a serious injury and relied on soup and medicine to support her. The mansion, which looked glamorous, was already empty inside. Son's daughter.In.Law can still handle it. No matter how difficult it is, she won't touch the old lady's body. Your husband is walking outside, so it's hard for him to manage up and down. When it comes to difficulties, Mrs. Liu spoke kindly, while Su Ting listened obediently. Junior likes children, I believe you can tell. Although I used to be a lobbyist and hoped that the child would stay, Junior, you and Junior should also have their own children. Suqian nodded slowly. The news that the second master was resting in the study last night has already been known to the Qingzhou Academy. She had a child standing between them, but the incident at Ningguo Temple and Liu Shijun's attitude after returning to the mansion left Su Jian somewhat uncertain. Speaking of the child, there was nothing to say for a moment, and Su Yan used the excuse of going to check the preparation of the kitchen banquet and left the Qingzhou courtyard. An old lady brushed past her. After the old woman entered the Qingzhou garden, the old lady had the door closed and whispered a few words. As soon as Su Gui returned to Linglong Garden, Chanpu reported to the guests from Su Mansion to congratulate him. Knowing that there was news, Su Jian didn't have time to drink water and rushed to the nearby front yard. Through the rockery, familiar sounds could be heard. "What's your name?" Su Chini looked at the little boy with his hands down. Liu Hemming, the little boy finished speaking and made a face at him, sticking out his tongue. Seeing the figure of Su Yan in the distance, he smiled and ran away. "I don't know what's good about this child when he doesn't come to see his mistress, so he must stay." Kai Wei murmured softly. "It's not clear whether it's good or not, as it hasn't been adjusted yet," Su Yan replied softly. She quickened her pace, not wanting to make Su Chini suspicious, with a faint smile on her face. Su Chini raised his head slightly, and the attendant handed the things in her hand to Xiang Jin. "How can the gift given to the mansion be given here? A lot of people came to congratulate us a few days ago, and the mansion was bustling with activity. They moved to the side room to speak more conveniently. Young lady, this is your favorite preserved fruit." The servant smelled the fragrance. Before leaving the cabinet, Su Yan loved to eat sweets. Being remembered by others, warmth dissipated the gloom that had been weighing on her heart for the past 2 days. She couldn't wait to taste one, and then her mouth curved and her eyebrows and eyes curved. In the past 2 days, this sweet touch has made her feel the taste. Xiangjin signaled to the young master's attendants and everyone retreated. "What did you ask?" As soon as the others left, Su Yan looked at his younger brother who had been increasingly calm for a long time and asked in a low voice. "The person who testified against you is just a homeless man. He thinks that wealthy families in the upper guest hall eat a lot, but when he saw a woman, he had delusions and knocked her unconscious, intending to have ulterior motives." At this point, Su Qian's voice paused for a moment, unconsciously decreasing slightly. Because many people suddenly arrived, they scared him away. Who came here? Su Qian's words made her heart tremble, and she immediately regretted asking. It seems that she was wrong in speculating about the situation at the time of the incident. On that day, something unknown happened at Ningguo Temple. He said everyone has extraordinary skills. Su Qian noticed something. Sister, there's something you haven't told anyone about. No, Su Yan said as she ate a candied fruit, but many images came to her mind. Who was the person who flipped through the window that night? Who are those people who appeared at Ningguo Temple? That person has tarnished your reputation and is speechless. As usual, he has been beaten to death. Su Qian didn't know what Su Qian was thinking and said the result of the handling. That person's confession is similar to what Kai Wei said, and it matches before and after the incident. It's useless to keep it for a while. Su Qian paused for a moment and then picked up a candied fruit. By the way, I ordered someone to go to Ningguo Temple to inquire about the news yesterday. The person who went reported that there were 2 other people who were also learning about the events of the day. In order to avoid causing panic, they did not take any action and returned directly. Seeing that Sui did not respond, he thought she was scared out of control. Su Qian's tone became even gentler. Sister, don't worry. I know how to do it for my younger brother. Just as I was about to have a detailed conversation with Su Qian, someone came to see him for an urgent matter. Mrs. Liu sent someone to call Su Yi to accompany the female guests, and the two had to hastily say goodbye. After a 3-day banquet, the mansion finally returned to its former tranquility. After dinner, Kai Wei massaged Su Yan's shoulders. Young lady, I heard that the little boy was very popular with King Zuiwan. I made a room for him to live in and take care of him with 3 meals of fruits and dim sum a day. When it came to the boy, Su Gui remembered that Liu Shijun had not yet completed his orders. These 3 days, he had only seen him and his guests pushing cups and exchanging cups from afar in the mansion, full of energy. The old man only knows how to be good at diplomacy. It's been 3 days since he last came to visit his grandmother. Young lady, don't you think the old lady is spoiling that boy too much? It's not my own flesh and blood. Realizing that her words were not correct, Kai Wei's hands trembled. Su Yan opened her eyes and the figure behind her approached, nervously looking at her. In the future, it can't be like this anymore. Rumors have spread that the Grand Liu mansion cannot accommodate a child. Suqian looked at the moonlight scattered on the courtyard outside the window and reminded her. How could she not perceive the changes that the child had brought to the mansion? If it were to blame, it would be her failure to retain her husband and have her own offspring. Chapter 5. Based on his intention. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Kai Wei understood what was being said, and she also heard Mrs. Liu's words. She asked in a low voice. Grandma, what should we do now? Whether or not to come is entirely up to his will. What's rushing on? After all, she is a woman with a thin face. It is not the behavior of a noble lady to make her actively engage in sexual activity, and in the past few days, the entire Yongqing city has been praising Liu Shijun for his good fighting skills and great righteousness. His future career is bound to soar. Su Yan did not answer and accidentally scratched his abdomen. Mrs. Liu's words rang in her ears. That child has a handsome appearance and delicate skin, probably deeply loved and cared for by his parents before. The night is hazy, and the candles are dancing. Organizing the banquet was too tiring, so Mrs. Liu sent someone to pass on the invitation to Su Yan and let her rest for 2 days in Linglong Garden. As soon as the messenger's wife left, Liu Shijun appeared in the room with a clear breeze and a bright moon. The familiar spacious room suddenly became narrow. Liu Shijun scanned for a week before finally turning his gaze to Su Yan sitting in front of the bronze mirror. He let go of his bun and took off his coat, indicating that she was about to go to bed. "Grandmother asked me to come and see you." Upon hearing this, Su Yan's mouth curved slightly, and Mrs. Liu was well-intentioned. "I'll go pour you water." Su Yan looked through the mirror at the tall and handsome figures inside, with a gentle voice. "No need. I drank it before I came." Liu Shijun stood with his hands down, his gaze only momentarily fixed on the figure in the mirror before moving away. He looked around with some discomfort and sat down not far from Su Yan. "The management in the mansion is very good. Over the years, you have worked hard." Suqian sat down, picked up the comb and combed it a bit. There were many things she wanted to ask and say, but she couldn't say a word despite being stuck in her chest. Why does he seem to have changed as soon as he leaves Yongqing? In recent years, the government has only received a few letters from him. Why does he never mention her? If it's not convenient, why not write it separately for her? Over the years, he has been enduring hardship in the mansion all thanks to his friendship. Have he ever thought about this? The room was so quiet that one could hear the swaying sound of the gentle breeze blowing the fine leaves outside the window. Liu Shijun twirled his fingertips on his legs. The woman with green silk like a waterfall sat with her spine straight. She used to be gentle and affectionate, but now she seems to have a bit more determination. "My dear." After breaking the tranquility, Liu Shijun said for a while, "My child is named Hemming, and Liu Mansion is shining brightly." He looked at Su Qian with a gleam in his eyes. "I've been busy with banquets these past few days, so I've left the matter of the ancestral temple behind," Su Ting said with a soft tone after pausing for a moment. "It's not a big deal. It's just that this child is clamoring to see his mother, and I'm busy all day with someone to take care of and accompany me personally. Maybe I won't go and disturb my grandmother. I grew up in front of my grandmother since I was young, and I must never let children disturb her peace again. It is not appropriate to raise children and leave them in nursing homes. I have instructed someone to go and inquire about Renyazi. When there is news, I will ask someone to inform you." As Su Yan's words fell, a strange expression appeared on Liu Shijun's face. Over the years, she has been in charge of the Liu mansion and has long developed a keen eye for insight. "I haven't been in Yongqing for many years, and I'm about to take office soon. It's not a big deal for me to bother with such a small matter as Renyazi. Liu Shijun opened his mouth and didn't say anything more. If he insisted on interfering in this matter, it would actually provoke more thoughts. "Okay." The room fell silent once again. Suqian was so tired that she couldn't help but lift her sleeve to cover her face and yawn, her voice spreading far and wide. The firelight illuminates the room, warm and cozy. She, who should have stayed on the bed, is a bit confused at this moment. On his wedding night, he was so drunk and unconscious that he waited on her all night. Now, the two of them were watching the clouds open and the moon was shining. It was time to move forward. Suqian stood up and was about to speak when he saw Liu Shijun standing up. "I'll come see you another day." Suqian stared blankly at his back, and when he realized it, he only saw a short shadow disappear at the door. Kai Wei and Xiangjin pushed the curtains in, and Su Xuan finally withdrew his gaze. Yi walked so fast. A long farewell is better than a newlywed one. He's doing well, as if he's completely clueless. The two of them were surprised to hear each other's words. When they approached Su Qian, they exchanged a glance and both closed their mouths. Their words had already been fully captured by Su Yan's ears. At that moment, she suddenly remembered the boy who always climbed the wall before leaving the pavilion, sitting on a tree branch in the sunlight, and with her head protruding from the window, she depicted the interesting stories of the market, feeling very comfortable. "Grandma." Xiangjin saw no anger on Su Gui's face and was somewhat puzzled. "Why don't you keep second master?" Suqian gently shook her head, not to mention that she didn't know how to deal with Liu Shijun in that matter now, but his words and actions with her after returning also made her a bit confused. Perhaps those thoughts were just her own thoughts. Let some things take their course. You should also take a break earlier. Suqian didn't let them persuade him anymore and lay down. The next day, the messenger from the gatekeeper arrived, and halfway through, Su Yan ordered someone to call Liu Shijun. He arrived quickly, and when he approached her with a bright expression, he bent down without warning. Su Ting was surprised and lowered his head to see him trim her skirt for her. For a moment, she felt the young man from the past come back, and her face couldn't help but feel a slight heat, giving him a slight smile. Liu Shijun gave her an indifferent smile and turned to look at this group of people. Xiangjin ordered everyone to stand in a row, waiting for the master's opinion. Suqian saw that Liu Shijun had not spoken, and just as she was about to ask a question, Liu Shijun suddenly spoke up. These people are old and young, afraid that it will be troublesome to train them. Let's look for them again. In theory, she should be in charge of such small matters. There were many people standing in the courtyard, and everyone was surprised that Liu Shijun would interfere in such small matters. Yes, it's true that the relationship between second master and grandma is stronger than Jin Jian. I saw it with my own eyes today, and indeed it is. In a few days, new teeth will come, and we will bring them for the second master and grandmother to see. No one saw someone following Ren Yazi out of the mansion. Suqian turned around and prepared to return to Linglong Garden, but saw Liu Hemming coming out from the side and running past her. Seeing Liu Shijun, he stepped forward and hugged his calf. Dad, what you say doesn't count. Suqian couldn't help but stop walking. Go and greet your mother. The Kaizong temple is a definite matter, and Liu Shijun's words may sound unpleasant, but they are also impeccable. Suqian waved gently to Liu Hemming. I have a mother. Liu Hemming's clear eyes looked at Su Yan, holding onto Liu Shijun's calves tightly with both hands. Suqian's face turned pale. Kai Wei and Xiang Jin wanted to scold, but were forced to retreat by Su Yan's gaze. They squatted down and extended their arms. Upon hearing the naive rebuttal, Liu Shijun was also taken aback. He angrily shook his legs and lowered his voice, sternly reminding him. Don't forget what my father told you before entering the mansion. Liu Hemming pursed his lips, slowly put down his hands, looked at Su Yan, and walked towards her reluctantly. A child without rules, it's your fate for grandma to be your mistress. No one knows what kind of mood grandma has when it comes to raising someone else's child. It's been several days since she had a good meal, and the child can't understand what's wrong. Kai Wei couldn't help but teach her grandmother a lesson for the child. Liu Shijun's relaxed expression suddenly changed. Bold, there's no room for you to speak here. To scold Kai Wei in front of Su Yan is like scolding her as the master. Chapter 6. Disguised Monks. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Xiangjin, Kai Wei, Changpu, and Ditang, the four female maids, had been serving Su Qian from the beginning. Although they were all servants, it was well known in the mansion that they were different from everyone else. It is surprising that the second master became angry with his beloved wife for his adopted son. Xiangjin lowered her head and felt like admitting her mistake, while Su Qian stepped forward to block her. The second master wanted me to be the mother of this child, hoping that I would give this child dignity and good upbringing, but now he is indulging him in ignoring it. It's better for the master to go compensate your mother. Liu Shijun did not expect that the gentle and obedient Su Yan would get angry at such small things, afraid of changes, and his words were slightly harsh. He lowered his head to signal the child, and when he looked up, he showed a smiling face towards Su Yan. Liu Hemming gave a slight bow and his childish voice rang out, my son didn't understand the rules and collided with my mother. Please teach me. Suqian remained silent. The boy was raised delicately before, but his temperament was not very good. Now that he is raised under her lap, if there is any mistake, it is her fault. Mother. Liu Hemming tugged at the corner of her clothes with his fingertips and began to pounce. Have you figured it out yet? Mother is strict, not afraid. Su Yan lowered her head slightly and asked him. Seeing her fair little face nodding earnestly, Su Yan took his hand and walked away. During this time, Liu Hemming cautiously turned around and waved at Liu Shijun. The child's palms were warm and delicate, and he was still young. He didn't realize what it was like to have no biological parents, Su Ting thought. Returning to Linglong Garden, Su Yan sat down and Liu Hemming stood in front of her, carrying in a warm voice. What do you usually like to eat? I'll have the kitchen prepare it. What my mother loves to eat, even my son loves to eat. Upon hearing this, Su Xuan's heart surged with mixed emotions, and he heard Liu Hemming say, my mother said she would personally make it for my son to eat. The corners of Su Yan's mouth gradually faded away. Good child, what does your mother make for you to eat? Liu Hemming's bright eyes began to flicker, and then he opened his eyes wide to look at her. Son means that whatever the mother likes, the son likes it. No wonder some people like to listen to sweet words, which really soften people's hearts. After playing with him for a while, I found that he was a bit restrained. Su Ting got up and asked him to continue playing in the yard. Suqian was momentarily stunned as he looked at the little figure behind him. No wonder it was pleasing to the people of the Liu mansion, but it was somewhat similar to his childhood. You go prepare first, and then follow me out of the mansion to buy fabric for the young master. Suqian looked at the direction of Liu Hemming's departure and instructed Xiangjin beside her. By early noon, the streets were sparsely populated, and the sound of horse hooves echoed through the long alleys and fields. Wheezing, you don't have long eyes, you're looking for death. The groom scolded angrily, the horse roared on its back, and the carriage came to a sudden stop. Su Yi used some strength to stabilize her posture and gestured for Xiangjin to go out and investigate. After waiting for a while, no one came back. Su Yan lifted the curtain and happened to see Xiangjin standing under the window, looking somewhere. What's going on? Someone crashed into the carriage and startled the horse, Xiangjin replied respectfully upon hearing the sound. That person is somewhat similar to the monk. Suqian looked in the direction of her gaze. The figure was carrying a bundle and burying its head in a hurry on the way. Did you really see it? Xiangjin nodded and shook her head. The walking form and face are very similar, but the monk doesn't have a hair crown. Suqian immediately instructed Kai Wei to take a carriage to the market, and Xiangjin followed her up. The man has a strong sense of vigilance, walking and stopping, turning back to investigate and secretly accelerating his pace. As we left the east of the city, we drifted further and further away. After a pillar of smoke, the man entered a forest where there was a dilapidated courtyard and a dilapidated house. Cooking smoke curled up, and the air was filled with the smell of herbs, causing panic. Who are you? Hurry up and get out of here, be careful of me. The man swung a long wooden bench and was about to smash it. Xiangjin lifted her sleeve and exposed her fair wrist, then stepped forward with a swift step and grabbed the bench. The man saw them clearly, looked surprised, and then turned into a rogue expression. He swung his hands and exerted force, making the bench weigh 1,000 pounds and unable to control it. Today, I will teach you a lesson on behalf of heaven and make you harm others. Xiangjin got a wooden stool as a weapon and turned her back to hit the man. The man hugged his hands and looked even more mischievous. If you dare to touch half of my hair, you won't know the truth from me. Is it your guest coming, Lin? Please come in quickly. A hoarse, weak, and breathless voice came from the direction of the room. Upon closer inspection, it turned out to be an old woman. Hey, good. Lin straightened his waist and answered quickly and easily, but walked towards the outside of the courtyard. Suqian followed behind, and Xiangjin threw away the bench and chased after her. To be honest, little one. Lin Zi paused and looked at the dilapidated house in the courtyard, choked up for a moment and continued, I have a mother who has been bedridden for a long time. She spent all her money on treatment before taking on this job. Who entrusted it to? Su Yan asked in a deep voice. Lin Zi hesitated for a moment and felt very embarrassed. Now it's up to Grandma to think about who she offended. Don't trust him lightly, I'll take him to see the official now, Xiangjin said, reaching out her hand towards Lin Zi's neck. She was so scared that Lin Zi knelt down on the ground and wiped the sweat from his forehead with her sleeve up. I use people's money to help people relieve disasters. Grandma doesn't believe me. I have evidence, there is evidence. Suqian looked at his tense eyes and nodded at Xiangjin. Not yet. Xiangjin scolded. Lin Zai turned around and entered the room, quickly ran to them with a cloth bag in his hand. Taking the cloth bag from his hand, she opened it and found silver and a piece of paper inside. Xiangjin quickly handed it to Su Jian. Just the day before I went to the temple, I found a cloth bag in the yard. My mother happened to be sick that day and needed to see a doctor. Isn't this a timely help? Suqian put away the paper and looked at the forest expressionlessly, saying coldly, do you know what consequences this will bring? If a woman loses her innocence and chastity, not only will she die, but it will also make the entire family unable to hold her head up. Just thinking about it will make Su Qian's spine cool. Following the style of Mrs. Liu that day, she is afraid that at this moment, please forgive me, Grandma. I know my mistake, but I dare not do it anymore. Lin was so scared that he kowtowed on the ground and begged for mercy. Please have mercy on the little one, Grandma. The little one is going to be imprisoned. What should my mother do? Suqian glanced at the dilapidated house and looked at Lin Yuyan coldly with a serious smile. Think carefully about who knows your secrets. If you dare to lie. Xiangjin followed behind angrily and said, if I want to let the servant know who is harming you, I will definitely twist his head off and kick it as a ball. The little one knows what to do. The little one knows what to do. Lin watched as they left, stood up from the ground and couldn't help but reach out to touch their necks, murmuring, unfortunate wealth, it has tricked me. Chapter 7. First Class Good Goods. You are listening at novelfull.audio. At the entrance of Qianma Alley, the carriage was traveling very slowly, and Su Qian and Xiangjin got on in an inconspicuous place. Grandma, the servant bought some fashionable dim sum. Kai Wei opened the paper and the fragrance overflowed. Su Qian waved her head, and Kai Wei saw the situation and rewrapped the paper. Seeing that the master's emotions were not right, Kai Wei looked at Xiangjin. Xiangjin's face was also not very good, and she sat down beside her. There was nothing to say along the way. Su Qian returned to Linglong Garden and had a sip of tea. Grandma, here we are. Di Tang followed a woman and a child behind her, bowing her head and offering her blessings. Su Qian casually put something into his sleeve and saw the ruler in the person's hand, only then did he remember that it was the person who made clothes for Liu Hemming. Grandma, the young master thinks Linglong Garden is boring and has gone outside. I will go find it now. Has the Star Yao Garden been cleaned up? Su Yan asked, holding a paper-wrapped calamus in his hand. To my grandmother, I've packed up properly. During the time when Su Yan was getting to know the situation, Liu Hemming had already been brought back. After measuring, Su Xian asked someone to take out the dim sum, open it and hand it to him. Liu Hemming blinked his sparkling eyes, took it from his hand and put it into his mouth. In no time, the corners of his mouth and hands were covered in debris. Su Qian took out a handkerchief in his hand and wiped it for him little by little. After wiping, Su Yan handed the handkerchief to Kai Wei and gently asked the small figure in front of her. People are small and mischievous, and their behavior is obedient, but they are not as crude and unbearable as those of rural Zhuangzi. Considering that their family background was decent, Su Yan pondered, but saw Liu Hemming pouting and looking at her with dissatisfaction. His small face was bulging, and his bright big eyes were filled with stubbornness and grievances. Suqian secretly said that the child had just lost a loved one, and it was not very pleasant to meet her a few times. Today's closeness actually made him uncomfortable. Go take a look at the small courtyard prepared for you, and come back to tell your mother if there are any areas you are not satisfied with. As she spoke, she gestured for Xiangjin to take him. Liu Hemming didn't bow and walked slowly absent-mindedly. As soon as she was discharged from the hospital, she regained her jumping posture and disappeared in the blink of an eye. Xiangjin quickly quickened her pace. Suqian's mouth curved slightly. As long as you treat him sincerely and plan for him, you truly deserve to be your legitimate son. Coupled with Liu Shijun's current achievements, his parents should rest assured. Grandma, the young master has sent someone over. Changpu walked quickly inside. Upon hearing Su Qinyi deliver the message, Su Ting personally went to the gatehouse. Seeing the messenger, his eyes darkened a bit. The young master instructed to burn it immediately after reading it. Seeing Su Jian nod, the person who came immediately went back to reply. Linglong Garden, after Su Yan entered the room, he ordered someone to close the door and took it out of his sleeve to carefully examine it. His eyebrows furrowed slightly as he watched the paper turn into ashes in the flames, but his solemn expression did not dissipate for a long time. Someone is secretly investigating the pilgrims who appeared at Ningguo Temple that day. Did something happen in Ningguo Temple that day? Returning to Linglong Garden, Su Yan had someone guard outside and took out a note given by a fake monk. What is the fresh way of writing, where there are traces of beauty in individual details, wild grass but not the usual font? Grandma, do you see who's trying to harm you? Xiangjin came in holding the calming soup and saw Suqian holding a note in her hand, lost in thought. I can't tell, murmured Su Jian. This writing style is extremely rare. Xiangjin was a bit surprised. Even her grandmother found it difficult, and now it's tricky. Grandma treats people gently, abides by etiquette, and has never spoken a word of importance to anyone since entering the mansion for many years. She has never used any dirty means, nor has she offended anyone. Is there any misunderstanding? If it weren't for witnessing it with her own eyes and experiencing it heart-wrenching, Xiangjin would not believe it to be true. That person put in a lot of effort to design a vicious method that would ruin my reputation. It couldn't be a misunderstanding. However, she didn't know when she had been so hated to the bone. Suqian folded the note with a calm expression, put it away, and half relieved and half schemed, saying, and wait and see if there are any other moves waiting ahead. Xiangjin clenched her fist with hatred, making a bone-clicking sound. Kai Wei saw her in such a situation outside the door and gestured for her to go out. When there was no one around, she couldn't resist Caiwei's questioning. Xiangjin told her about their tracking. Oh no, Kai Wei heard as she lifted her legs and was grabbed by Xiangjin. What's wrong? Xiangjin, who likes to solve things with her fists, didn't have Caiwei's flexible thinking and pulled her puzzled. Kai Wei glanced around and said a sentence at a volume that only two people could hear. Xiangjin couldn't help but nod as she listened. It was night, and Su Yan went to bed early, refreshed himself before waking up. Breakfast had just been set up on the table, emitting a warm breeze. Has Liu Hemming ever been here? Kai Wei knew that the master was concerned about whether the child had used breakfast. After all, they would be adopted under her name in the future. If they were not taken care of properly, they would fall under a harsh name. No, Kai Wei replied as she spread her cloth. Acaris Calamus has sent breakfast to the young master. This time should have been used up. Suqian picked it up. Kai Wei told her that Liu Shijun had been waiting outside the courtyard for a long time as an attendant. What is he doing here? It said that the gatekeeper's successor has arrived, please ask Grandma to take a look. But the maidservant returned to him. Grandma can go after finishing her meal. Suqian took a sip and put down the bowl before getting up and walking out. Kai Wei quickly followed behind and couldn't help but mutter, the second master is more considerate of people than our grandmother. Is he still the second master we grew up with? Why does it seem like he has changed people? Perhaps he happened to pass by and pass a message, Xiangjin blurted out. Kai Wei, who had lost both parents since childhood, remained calm in her affairs, while Xianjin was nurtured by her parents as a guardian. She knew martial arts and was straightforward, not as cautious as Kai Wei. Outside the courtyard, when he saw the figure of Su Yan, Liu Shijun followed his attendant Yuzhan and quickly collected gifts for her, following behind them. "Grandma, you see, there are quite a few people this time, all of them are first-class goods. You can be very picky." The leader approached Su Qian and flattered him, whispering in a low voice. "Stand up, line up, raise your head, and let Grandma take a closer look." The leader turned around and turned towards the others, revealing his true colors. Suqian's gaze swept over them one by one. With a pure background and nimble hands and feet, stand up. With Su Gui's instructions, Kai Wei stepped forward and ordered. "Are you over 18? She pointed to a slightly drooping woman and said, "You're not old enough, go back." Upon seeing this, the boss quickly leaned forward and softened his body, saying, "Miss Kai Wei, it doesn't matter if you're older. It's better to handle things satisfactorily." The woman looked up at Kai Wei and finally felt blessed. "Grandma, servant Wandi, you have some understanding of the characters. Please take me in." Suqian only then glanced more at her predecessors, dressed appropriately, behaved well, and had a good figure, but for some reason, she didn't notice them. As she hesitated, the boss took out a sales contract. "I have no relatives at home, please give me a way to survive. If Grandma is willing to take her in, I will be a servant on a mission, willing to be a rough servant girl." Wandi knelt down with a thud. The rough girl has few monthly routines, and her work is dirty and tiring. Which girl doesn't want to be glamorous? Besides, she can recognize a few words, it seems that she has been forced to have no way out. "Do you know that if I take this promissory note, your life won't be up to you anymore?" Suqian lightly pulled out the contract from the leader's hand and held it in front of Wandi, asking seriously. "I know." Under Su Yan's serious gaze, Wandi did not hesitate at all. "Liufu is a noble family with complicated rules. I hope you will abide by the rules and regulations in the future, otherwise you will regret today's decision." Suqian watched as Wandi finished speaking word by word, placed the contract in Kai Wei's hand, and saw a relaxed expression on Wandi's face. "Thank you Grandma." Too soon, Kai Wei reminded beside her. As soon as Wandi stood up, she only gave a slight blessing and her voice jumped with joy. "Thank you, Grandma." No one knew, but when they saw this situation not far away, they turned around and left. Chapter 8. Merit in Saving People. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The new arrivals were taught the rules by specialized personnel and then distributed according to the situation in the hospital. Suqian arranged several matters before returning to Linglong Garden. "Grandma is starving, isn't she? Chanpu has prepared lunch in advance, and the servant will go and ask her to bring it. Let's go, maidservant. You pinch it for Grandma." Xianjin knew she didn't know the importance of her actions, and after saying that, she had already gone to the small kitchen. "Things are endless, and it hasn't been peaceful lately. Grandma is tired and thin. Others only see the glory of being the head of the family, but they don't know how much their grandmother has taken on behind the scenes. Perhaps he was really starving." After the incident at Ningguo Temple, Su Yan tasted the taste of his meal for the first time and even used a bowl full of rice. Suqian took a shower, changed into clothes, and prepared to take a nap, when bright girl voices came from outside. A beautiful figure walked quickly to Su Gui's side, affectionately embracing her arm and saying, "Sister-in-law. Liu Shijun's younger sister, Liu Rui. How about taking Yi with you next time on the street? My mother.In.Law is feeling unwell, and my father.In.Law has left work very late with little time. Mrs. Liu is getting older and doesn't like to make noise on her side. Therefore, Liu Rui often comes to find Su Yan to relieve her stress. Look at you, you're almost reaching your hair, you can't be so hot and bustling anymore. After Liu Shijun left the mansion, Su Yan adhered to morality and customs, and the days in the backyard were lonely and lonely. Lu Rui often came to accompany her, and Su Yan taught her how to taste tea, read, and gradually became easier to endure. Suqian softly reproached. Yi finally got the opportunity to get close to her sister.In.Law. In the future, I'm afraid my sister.In.Law will spend less and less time with Yi, Lu Rui said with a wry expression. The second brother returned to the mansion, and his sister.In.Law should have returned it to him. You. Su Yan smiled and said, is there any progress in female celebrities? My biological mother couldn't point it at me, Mrs. Liu didn't worry. My elder sister had already married and was far away in Qingcheng. Lu Rui knew that her life would inevitably fall on Su Yan. Upon hearing the accusation, Lu Rui was not angry either, but rather coquettishly said, you will know it tomorrow. Upon hearing this, Su Yan raised the corner of his mouth and gestured to the person beside him. Not long after, I took the paper and wrapped it up. What is this? Lu Rui looked at the paper bag and her eyes lit up. Bring it back to you. Su Yan took a sip of water. My sister.In.Law treats that kid so well. Lu Rui had already opened the paper bag, and the servant quickly put it on a plate for her. He picked up a piece and put it in his mouth, blurring, I personally went to buy a lot of things. Suqian pushed the unused cup next to her and retorted, what's the difference between you and me? Lu Rui laughed while eating. After the dim sum were finished, Lu Rui drank all the water in the cup, looked around and said, you all go down. I have something to say to Grandma. As everyone walked away, Lu Rui stood up and took her hand by Su Gui's side. Sister-in-law, although I haven't reached the age of G, I still understand some things. Second brother has been back to the mansion for so many days without resting in Linglong Garden, so you shouldn't have indulged him so much. More and more people are discussing in the mansion these days, saying that only you have such a big belly. No matter how young an orphan is, he is also someone else's child. Lu Rui's voice was getting quieter and she didn't dare to look at Su Yan's expression. She lowered her head and didn't dare to say another word. You are the master, how can you believe the rumors of servants? Your second brother is. Suqian wanted to justify Liu Shijun. Grandma, Di Tang's face didn't look too natural as he came in from outside. The old lady fell. Su Ting stood up from his position and said, is anyone going to invite a doctor? Although Mrs. Liu is in her 70s, she has always been in good health. No, the old lady didn't let it disturb you. My mother.In.Law is sick, and the male servants are not currently in the mansion. Only she can make the decision. Are you going soon? Su Ting stood up and walked out. Sister-in-law, you go first, I'll come later. Suqian didn't doubt anything else, only quickened his pace. Just outside the courtyard, I heard voices coming from inside. This old bone is thanks to you. It seems that you are a clever person. From now on, you can serve me by my side. Suqian walked in and saw Mrs. Liu sitting half on the bed, speaking kindly to her kneeling figure on the ground. Madam Xie, I will do my best to serve you and not disappoint you. Noticing someone coming in, Wan Dai stood up and retreated to the side. Suqian walked straight to the bed and held the old man's hand, saying, Grandmother, granddaughter.In.Law is late. Where did it hurt? Mrs. Liu was in good spirits and patted the back of her hand with relief. Her gaze swept over her and she kindly said, I'm not in any way, so there's no need to make a big fuss. My granddaughter.In.Law took the initiative and sent someone to invite a doctor, Su Yan said, I can't be careless. Upon hearing this, Mrs. Liu paused for a moment and changed the topic. As you mentioned earlier, you also heard that. Is it feasible for me to ask you for her? Now it's Su Yan's turn to be a bit puzzled, but he quickly figured it out. It's all up to my grandmother to make the decision. You've been tired lately, and I was thinking of having someone send it to you. Since you're here, please accept my heartfelt wishes. Mrs. Liu gave her mother-in-law a wink and quickly brought out 2 brocade boxes. And you, thank you for saving people. Suqian had just asked Kai Wei to come up and take down something when he heard the excited voice of a woman from behind. Thank you, madam. Thank you, madam. As soon as he entered the mansion, he received a reward, which may be the first time in the mansion. The doctor has arrived, and Su Yi has calmed down and is waiting by the side. After the examination, she reminded her to pay attention in the future and rest for a day to recover from her past. It was only then that Su Xuan finally calmed down. Before leaving, she didn't see the figure of Wan Dai. Returning to Linglong Garden, Su Yan briefly washed up and entered the interior, lying on the couch. Thinking of the scene when Lu Rui came, the afterglow couldn't help but look at the door. Please or not? Please, will he come? After Liu Shijun returned to the mansion, his expression flashed through Su Gui's mind one by one. For some reason, he suddenly lost interest. Su Gui turned around and closed his eyes. The faint almost hallucinatory footsteps spread from far to near, and the man opened his eyes in a daze. He lifted his robe and sat, his gaze deep and contemplative. You're here, Su Yan said in a drowsy and affectionate voice, slowly sitting up straight. Liu Shijun seemed to have been disturbed by her thoughts, and when he looked back at her, his eyes were clear. San Mei said. Liu Shijun clenched his fist and touched his lips with a slightly floating voice. Let me take a look at you. Listening to his cold voice and looking at his upright posture, Su Ting's drowsiness had dissipated. But it was Liu Shijun who looked at Su Gui, who was as green as a waterfall, wearing only a white coat and white and proud. His eyes gradually softened. She is as beautiful, gentle, and touching as the cardamom in her memory. Do you still remember the day of your wedding? Liu Shijun looked at her with deep eyes, and somehow recalled that it was in this room at that time. On the day of my wedding, after socializing with guests, I returned to my new room to drink Hajin wine with you. The red candle swayed, and her beloved was right in front of her. With just 1 cup of wine, Su Yan was drunk. The young man in front of her was the person she had been with for a lifetime, a beautiful wine at a good time, and a full moon with beautiful flowers. I finally got married to you, my dear. We will be a couple for life and death, never apart. The man's clear voice echoed in his ear. After speaking, he fell drunk at the table, and Su Yi struggled to get him onto the bed to take care of him and rest. The next morning, a letter was waiting for her on the table. Suqian tightly grasped the cuffs, looked up and met his 4 eyes, with many unwillingness and doubts. At this moment, it became a thick fog that could not be lifted, making people dizzy and confused. Chapter 9. Waiting for a long time. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Grandmother said in the letter that you have been living a lively and colorful life in the mansion in recent years. Liu Shijun seemed to have thought of something, and his voice sank. In the years of the border battlefield, I have seen all the joys and sorrows, and my hands are stained with human blood. Birds fluttering their wings outside the window, chattering and making noise. Liu Shijun remained silent. He failed the imperial examination before leaving the army and returning to his hometown. The world only saw him honored, but never saw the bloody storms he faced. Suqian didn't know what he was thinking and tried to comfort him, but he saw crimson in his eyes. What's wrong with you? Suqian frowned and looked at his eyelids. What caused his emotions to fluctuate? No problem, Liu Shijun squeezed out an ugly smile and grabbed her hand before saying, there are 3 happy things in life. Now that I have all of them, my son, you are also happy for me, right? Suqian awkwardly moved his hand and wanted to pull it out, when the sound of fish fighting echoed outside. General Xiao, the old lady is looking for you. Liu Shijun quickly released his hand and stood up. I'll go to my grandmother's place first. Looking at the distant and unfamiliar figure, Su Yan withdrew his gaze and sat on the couch in a daze. Xiangjin blinked her eyes and came in from outside. What kind of virtue is uncle? He comes to disturb people's beautiful dreams in the middle of the night. Xiangjin tucked in Suqian's corner, feeling drowsy again, and refrained from yawning. What time is it now? Su Yan asked. At the end of my life, Grandma has been working hard lately. Please take a break. It's so dark outside the window that I can't see my fingers. The doctor said Mrs. Liu is okay. Why hasn't she slept so late? Xiangjin extinguished the candle, closed the door, and met Kai Wei, who had just left the room. Did second master leave again? Next time, let's close the door tightly and not let anyone come in to disturb Grandma's sleep. Not to mention it's okay, Xiangjin exclaimed angrily. Kai Wei pulled her into the room, unable to explain the things between men and women to her, and only reminded her softly. To make people hear that the servants of Linglong Garden dare not say anything that prevents the master from entering the door. Sister, please keep your voice down. Suqian woke up early and fell asleep picking Wei beside the bed, knowing that Liu Shijun had not returned later. I heard that a distinguished guest has arrived in the front yard. Xiangjin came in from outside and helped Kai Wei tidy up. Do you know, second master? Su Ting stood up and walked towards the dressing table, picking up a comb and combing it slowly and systematically. I should know, Xiangjin replied. After changing clothes, grooming, and having a simple breakfast, Su Jian walked out of the room and saw Liu Shijun standing by the small bed by the window, holding a book. Mulan flower with reduced characters. Suqian pursed her lips. It was a book she had read to pass the time in the deep courtyard, but she had been busy lately and didn't put it away. The servants naturally avoided him when they saw him here. All right. Liu Shijun put down his book, cleared his throat, concealed his emotions, and his voice returned to its usual sunny state. You come with me to meet the guests. After giving orders, Liu Shijun passed by her side and did not see Su Yan's expression change slightly. He opened his mouth and deliberately kept a distance to follow behind him. Not far from Linglong Garden, there is a figure looking forward at the intersection ahead. Say hello to Dad. During the reign of Liu Hemming, Liu Shijun collected his gifts in accordance with the rules. When he saw Su Gui beside him, he hesitated for a moment until the maid behind him coughed softly. It was then that he obediently collected his gifts and greeted his mother. I woke up early today. Su Yan touched Liu Hemming's head and raised his eyebrows to look at the maid behind him. The old lady asked you to take care of the young master. Wandi lowered her head and respectfully replied, the young master is missing his father. There is nothing else to do in the courtyard, so I will take him over when I am idle. The maidservant in front of her was wearing a coarse cloth water blue maidservant outfit, with skin like condensed fat. Her distant eyebrows were full of tenderness, and she dared to tell the truth, which surprised Su Yan a bit. Liu Hemming opened his small arms to block Wandi. I begged her to bring me here. Suqian opened her eyes slightly, not realizing that Wandi had such skills. It had only been a day since entering the mansion, and Lady Liu looked at her with admiration. Even Liu Hemming was different from her. Come to my mother's yard later. Suqian's face was light, and he bent down to speak kindly to Liu Hemming. He stood up and saw that Liu Shijun had already left first. Wandi looked up and together with Liu Shijun, looked towards the direction where the two of them had left. Suqian took 2 quick steps and struggled to keep up with Liu Shijun, saying, Did you come specifically to wait for me to meet this guest? After waiting for a while without hearing an answer, Su Yan looked up and found that Liu Shijun was deeply troubled. Second master. Liu Shijun realized his composure and slowed down a bit. Yes, General Left Cavalry specially came to see our couple. Since it's so important, why don't you invite me into the front yard? How can I afford to be mistaken by my concubine? For some reason, Su Yan felt like there was a gaze following her like a shadow. She suppressed her curiosity and walked chatting as if nothing had happened. He arranged for us to meet at the restaurant during morning tea time. The carriage in the mansion was waiting at the door. Su Ting got on the carriage, but no one came behind. The wind blew the curtains, and outside, Liu Shijun's figure had already sat on the horse's back. She first stayed in the study, but now she doesn't want to ride with her, which disgusts him. So, what did his scene in front of the bed last night mean? Suqian sat with a solemn expression, tightly gripping the handkerchief in her sleeve, almost twisted into a rope. Qianji Restaurant. It is rumored that this restaurant has a connection with the royal family, and ordinary guests cannot become guests. Liu Shijun stood on the side waiting for Su Gui to get off the carriage. A small crack appeared in a window upstairs, capturing the scene on the street. General Liu, madam, the esteemed person has been waiting for a long time. Please go inside. Seeing the waiting left cavalry general, Su Xuan felt a little relaxed knowing that he was not the same person. Entering the restaurant, soldiers guard every distance. On the third floor, General Zhuo Biao led them to the third elegant room before pushing open the door and entering. General Xiao, Madam Xiao, please. General Zhuo Piaoqi was so polite to them that it made people feel like he was treating them as nobles. After the two of them evaded each other, Liu Shijun sat down, and Su Gui sat next to Liu Shijun. A simple melon and fruit tray placed on the table, with the main seat empty. Suqian was puzzled, and the two of them chatted about anecdotes about the battlefield, but in fact, they were not familiar with each other. Suqian was questioning the proposal that the other party specifically requested her to go with her when she heard a voice coming from afar. Madam Xiao, is she the legitimate daughter of Su Mansion on Jinyang Street? Exactly. Liu Shijun replied on behalf of Su Yan when he saw that he was absent-minded. I have never heard of you having a childhood sweetheart, young general. You. Yeah, I've been to the border for 5 years, I feel guilty to my wife. Liu Shijun shook his glass and raised his hand, raising his glass to Su Jian. Looking at his sincere eyes, Su Jian raised his glass. In the sight of the left escort flag general, the couple drank together. Interrupting General Zhuo Biao's words, Liu Shijun stood up to pour wine for him. I don't know if the general came to Yongqing and didn't greet him from afar, so he punished himself with 3 cups. Male socializing was already an ordinary thing, and for some reason, Su Yan vaguely felt something was not right. He always felt that the walls had ears, and Su Yan couldn't help but look around more. Thinking of the same feeling when leaving the mansion, he felt self-deprecating and suspicious in his heart. Chapter 10. Difficulties for you. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Someone came to find General Zhuo Biaoqi, and Liu Shijun took the opportunity to propose to leave. Liu Shijun, who was worried, just got on the horse and found Su Yan standing on the carriage, looking up at the restaurant. Hey, it's time we went back. Everything was so ordinary that it couldn't be any more ordinary. Su Yan lifted the curtain and sat in the third floor of the restaurant. General Zhuo Biao rode back and forth, returning through the back door, now respectfully bowing to a black shadow on the throne. I have seen it before. Please instruct me on how to become the sect leader next. Without hearing the command, the burly left escort flag general maintained a submissive posture, his head lowered slightly. After a while, the dark figure withdrew his grip on something, lifted his sleeve, stood up, and spoke with a look of awe at the world. This is different from your battlefield. If you leak any news, you will end up in failure. The last general will be punished. The left escort flag general unloaded his weapons and knelt down on one knee. This time, a small punishment and a big warning will serve as a warning to others. The black figure stood up, carrying a chill until he left the room. General Zhuo Piaoqi took a deep breath, his kneeling body limping into mud, and sat on the ground. Uyofu. As soon as Su Jian got out of the carriage, he saw Liu Shijun's back rushing into the mansion door, completely forgetting the friendship he had just had in the tavern. Grandma, Kai Wei reached out and summoned her thoughts. Second master has finally enlightened. In the eyes of others, Liu Shijun and his wife entered and exited together, showing exceptional affection. Suqian remained silent and calmly returned to Linglong Garden as if nothing had happened, where the steward was already waiting for her. After setting the day for the opening of the ancestral temple, Su Yi ordered the preparation of sacrificial offerings, including meals and watering of flowers personally provided in the courtyard. In his mind, he couldn't help but associate the message conveyed by Su Qinyi with the appearance of the left cavalry general. The person who enters through the window is not a cavalry general. Are those his subordinates? Remember the monk and the wanderer pointing out those people with extraordinary skills at the same time. No, 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 the time is wrong. Suqian's thoughts are complicated and chaotic. The childish fairy tale sound in the courtyard interrupted Su Yi. Liu Hemming appeared at the entrance of the courtyard with fish battle on his side. Let me do it. Upon hearing the words, Yu Zhan looked at Liu Hemming before bowing his hand to gather gifts and walking out of the yard. Greet my mother. Suqian turned around and saw Liu Hemming bowing in a standard manner. He reached out to help him and led him to sit at the stone table in the courtyard. Can you recognize characters? It is common for children to make mistakes. Liu Hemming has a baby fat face and nods and shakes his head, appearing cute and adorable. After the ancestral temple is opened, you will go to study ethnology. Liu Hemming suddenly stood up. No, my great-grandmother once said, just let my grandfather teach my son. The master in ethnic studies is of no use. If he misses his father, he can't miss me. Suqian looked at the child in front of her in surprise. If such a delusion spreads, how should our relatives view their lineage? Don't talk nonsense. Su Yan's tone intensified subconsciously, thinking about how to persuade him. However, Liu Hemming's face collapsed and he ran and cried as he spoke. Woo 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 woo. My mother is cruel to me. Kai Wei stepped forward to stop him and bring him back. Ah! Liu Hemming bit into Kai Wei's wrist, causing her to grin in pain. Taking advantage of the lack of attention, Liu Hemming turned around and ran out of the yard. Suqian stopped Xiangjin, and she quickly went to find a doctor to show Kai Wei. Grandma, this injury to the servant is not a problem, but it's that child. Grandma, think twice. Kai Wei held her bitten wrist without any obstruction. The whole family was trying to please Liu Hemming, so much so that he became more and more domineering. He was just a mischievous child, but if the inside was rotten, Su Yan would become a troublemaker both inside and outside. At this time, the people who would rashly remind her would only be those around him who genuinely cared for her. Who said it's okay? It's probably toxic. Chanpu picked leaves from the yard and hurriedly washed them, then vigorously rubbed them and applied them to Cai Wei's wrist. This is the local recipe of the elderly family when they were young, said the Acarus calamus while applying it. When I was a child, my servant was bitten by a dog. The elderly family said that I would lose my soul and go crazy. It took me a long time to find this herb. It's dinner time in the blink of an eye. Suqian did not take leave for the injured Kai Wei and asked her to accompany Mrs. Liu to the Qingzhou courtyard for a meal. There was clear congee and some delicious dishes on the table. Old Lady Liu sat on the main seat and watched her approach kindly. I can't compare myself to you young people here. Mrs. Liu patted the seat beside her and asked her to sit down. Grandmother, it's the granddaughter who didn't take good care of her. Suqian is in charge of the central feed, but Mrs. Liu's food on the table is too light. You really didn't take care of her well. You spoke up for your maidservant. If you really have the heart, you should go and have dinner with Juner. Mrs. Liu grabbed Su Jian's wrist and said gently, as women, let's first be gentle. Mrs. Liu had already noticed that she had some grievances in her heart when she left without saying goodbye. However, over the years, she had been managing her family well, and she also cared about her husband. She regularly worshipped and prayed to the Buddha, so Mrs. Liu did not take her caution to heart. The Su family's family path was in decline, and it was the Liu family who brought her over. It was only after a few years of dignified life as their mother-in-law. Kai Wei was injured, and Mrs. Liu scolded her. She even mentioned Liu Shijun, but Su Gui felt even more frustrated. Grandmother, Su Yan took a hand from Mrs. Liu's hand and said calmly, "Grandwife will be fine with second master, but today I'm a maid, tomorrow I should be in Linglong Garden. It's not that son's daughter.In.Law can't get along with a child. If there's no rule, how can we end up causing trouble outside in the future?" Looking at old lady Liu's gradually dignified face, Su Xuan knew that his goal had been achieved, and he ate congee for old lady Liu while chatting. "Since I have recognized him, he will become my legitimate eldest son in the future. The future of the Liu family relies entirely on him, and my granddaughter dare not slack off at all." Listening to Su Ting's systematic analysis, I found that Mrs. Liu's expression gradually eased. "I'm sorry for you," Mrs. Liu said heavily. "I heard that Xingyao garden has been tidied up properly. I'll have my child move out tonight." Seeing that the goal had been achieved, Su Yi was thinking of leaving when Mrs. Liu spoke earnestly and said, "No matter how good the child is, it's not from you. When I heard that Juner went to Linglong Garden, he stayed up all night and always slept in the study." Suqian was secretly shocked. "Last night, wasn't it Mrs. Liu who came to see him?" Mrs. Liu's murky eyes watched as Su Xuan changed, and her words rounded back without leaving a trace. "No matter why he left, it's reasonable for him to end up resting in Linglong Garden. Xiao, Juner, he took you out of the mansion. You should strike while the iron is hot." Mrs. Liu patted the back of Su Gui's hand as she spoke, waving to signal Su Gui to leave. Looking at the old lady's grayish bun, Su Ting nodded solemnly. On the way back, Su Yan gave Kai Wei a break. After marrying her into the Liu mansion, she never had a chance to sweep the tomb. Taking advantage of this gap, she went back to take a look. As soon as he entered the room, Di Tang told Su Yan that he had collected all the paper that could be collected in the mansion.